I unearthed a collection of horrifying FATS. Now they haunt my dreams. I never should have opened that door. It creaked like a coffin lid, heavy and foreboding. My heart raced as dread lanced through me. What was hidden behind that rusted, old door? It was just another day, a boring Sunday afternoon, really. I was cleaning out my late grandmother's attic, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams streaming through cracked windows. But then, curiosity twisted my gut. The attic was eerily quiet, just the sound of my own breathing. Shadows stretched and flickered, clinging to the corners like forgotten memories. The air was thick with dust, heavy with the scent of mildew and something else. Something darker. A chill crept down my spine, and I could swear I heard whispers soft and chilling trickling through the rafters. With each creak of floorboards beneath my feet, I drew closer to that door. I could feel the cold metal handle against my palm, sending jolts of unease through my body. As I turned the knob, a rush of stale air hit me, carrying a faint scent of decay. The darkness stared back at me. My eyes strained to adjust, but it felt like a void, swallowing everything whole. Then I saw them. A collection of objects, each one more unsettling than the last. An old doll with one eye, its smile twisted into a grimace. A yellowed photograph of a family with faces scratched out, their empty eye sockets haunting. A rusted knife glinting menacingly under what little light dared to enter the room. My heart thundered as a noise echoed a soft, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I froze. The hair on my arms stood on end. I backed away slowly, but something shifted in the dark. As if responding to my fear, it grew more intense, the shadows twisting and curling around me. A cold sweat formed at my brow. The lingering presence felt alive, breathing in sync with my panic. Suddenly, a sharp bang. My pulse quickened. I spun around to find the door I had opened slamming shut. Darkness swallowed the light, leaving me suspended in fear. I was not alone. I could feel it now, something lurking just beyond my vision, waiting. Then, a whisper, so close I could almost touch it. "Help!" I gasped, a scream caught in my throat. The shadows lunged, and everything around me fell silent. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The air grew thicker, suffocating me, as I stood frozen, heart pounding in my chest. The whisper echoed again, more desperate this time. Help! The darkness around me pulsed like a living entity, crawling toward my trembling form. I felt beads of sweat trickling down my back, each one a reminder of my isolation. Instinctively, I called out, "Who's there?" My voice trembled, cracking under the weight of the silence that swallowed my words. Only the oppressive quiet answered, wrapping around me like a vice. I hesitated, contemplating my next move. Desperation clawed at my insides, fueling a surge of defiance. I kicked the door, but it didn't budge. It felt as if it had merged with the walls, a tomb sealing me in. I was drawn to the doll, its one eye glistening in the dimness. My fingers brushed against its rigid form, and a jolt of electricity raced through me. Suddenly, the whispers crescendoed, now a cacophony of voices swirling around my mind, each one screaming for release. I staggered back, my heartbeat thundering like a war drum. I stumbled over the rusted knife, catching it just before it clattered to the ground. Through my fear, a singular thought pierced my mind. This was not just a collection of forgotten items. This was a prison, a haunt for lost souls. Help us! A chorus cried in unison, voices rising and falling like the tidal wave of sorrow and rage that threatened to drown me. I grasped the knife tighter, its cold metal grounding me, but the shadows around me thickened, inching closer. I backed away, my instincts screaming as some unseen force began tugging at the hem of my jeans, pulling me toward the doll. "No!" I shouted, struggling against the relentless pull. The whispers intensified, now sounding like shouts, frayed and agonizing. "Join us!" In a moment of sheer panic, I hurled the knife into the darkness. It vanished with a metallic thud, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned. The air cracked, tension electric, before the chorus erupted again but now echoed with deeper despair. The shadows surged forward as if fueled by my fear, morphing and twisting, forming limbs and grotesque features that I turned to run, barreling toward the door, but a wave of cold swept over me, knocking the breath from my lungs. It took everything I had to shove against the door, but it didn't yield. The voices grew louder. They were no longer just cries for help, they were angry, vengeful. A blinding flash erupted within the dark, illuminating the figures, the faces of tortured souls twisted in agony. They reached for me, spectral hands clawing through the shadows, grasping at my consciousness. My pulse hammered as I turned back to the cursed collection, desperate to end the nightmare. The doll, still sitting in morbid mockery, seemed to grin wider, an invitation laced with malice. The photograph flickered, the scratched-out faces morphing, each pair of empty eye sockets staring at me, a smoldering void filled with longing for vengeance. Then, from the depths of that darkness, the most terrifying figure rose, a tall, gaunt silhouette with elongated limbs, its skin a patchwork of decay and torment. It extended a bony hand, fingers curling like talons, pointing straight at me. I felt my heart stutter to a stop as I whispered, "What do you want?" The figure smiled, a mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with jagged teeth. In a voice that echoed through the very fabric of the room, it answered, to be remembered before I could process the horror spilling from its mouth. The shadows surged and collided against me, and I screamed as everything went black. Lying there in the suffocating void, consciousness fractured, I felt the icy grip around my ankles. The last thing I heard was the shuddering, collective breaths of the trapped souls, as the darkness swallowed me whole. And then, silence. My eyes flickered open, and I realized I was no longer in the attic. A new darkness surrounded me. I blinked, disoriented. I wasn't alone. The whispering chorus began again, enveloping me in a chilling embrace, and I could see a wall of faces staring right at me. Their eyes full of despair and longing, hauntingly familiar. And at the forefront, I saw my own reflection, twisted and desperate, caught in the same tidal wave of sorrow. Then a voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear, echoing ominously in the void. "You will never leave." The shadows roared to life, and my body was pulled into their depths, as I felt a growing panic. This was not merely a nightmare. This was just the beginning. I awoke to the sound of my heart hammering in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. The chill still lingered in the air, though, and a pervasive dread settled over me like fog. I lay on cold, uneven ground, surrounded by the faces that had haunted my dreams, just inches away, spectral forms of twisted agony, each shadowy visage grasping at the edges of my consciousness. That I blinked, desperate to gather my thoughts, but all that came was a rush of terror. My voice trembled as I croaked, "Where am I?" The faces shifted, some contorting into silent screams, others reaching ecstatically toward me, as if I was their salvation. I squeezed my eyes shut, attempting to drown out their pain, but the relentless whispers thrummed like the beating of a drum. "Find us, help us, join us." Lurching upward, I faced a looming wall of darkness, like an ancient tomb engulfing me. The shadows coiled and twisted, pooling beneath me as I rose to my feet with a jolt. The ground shifted strangely, pulsating like a heartbeat, the very essence of the lost souls around me melding into something alive. I was a candle flickering in an eternal storm, running out of light. "Get away from me!" I screamed, swiping at the spectral hands reaching for me, but each swipe only conjured deeper despair. I stumbled backward, and suddenly, the space around me transformed. The faces faded, replaced by grotesque tableaus of suffering. Scenes of torment flashed before me, families torn apart, anguished screams echoing in the distance, a child reaching toward a figure cloaked in darkness. Each image carved itself into my mind, unbearable and vivid, unspooling their horrific tales like a film reel with no end. "Please, stop," I cried, collapsing to my knees. But as I pleaded, new figures emerged from the shadowy depths, presences more substantial than the nebulous forms surrounding me. Deformed, hunched figures grinned with eyes aflame, glowing vibrant against the inky blackness, their mouths painted wide with malice. One stepped forward, a demonic figure draped in tattered cloth, its grotesque features illuminated by an unknown light, an invitation and a threat entwined. "You wish to help them?" it hissed, the voice dripping with derision. "Then you must remember. Remember this pain." Before I could register the shift in the atmosphere, a rush of memories collided upon me, tearing through my psyche like a tornado: the attic, the doll, the whispers, and my own reflection caught in the throes of terror. They poured forth me childhood, happy moments, my mother's warm embrace, all suddenly overlaid with darkness, twisted into nightmares that clawed at my heart. Faces of every person I knew flooded my mind, morphing into the tortured souls surrounding me, melding reality with the grotesque. That I staggered, dizzy from the loss of my former self, tempted to fall into their grasp, to accept this dreadful fate. But a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I couldn't succumb. I needed to find the truth, to unravel the origins of this misery. The air thickened as I staggered toward the only flickering light, a colossal door made of rotting wood, braced by ancient iron hinges. The whispers intensified, a cacophony pleading and threatening in equal measure. "Do not open that door," they cried, desperation lacing their voices, but the urge to push forward surged within me like a wildfire. Gripping the edges of the door, I took a breath, heart hammering, ready to pry it open. The figures around me shrieked, the sound piercing through the booming echoes of my own thoughts. "You will regret this," they chorused. With a surge of determination, I hurled myself against the door, and as it creaked open, a brilliant light spilled into the void, blinding and sickening. As the light engulfed me, I felt the shadows shrieking, a physical wave of anger crashing against me. But even as I fell into the brilliance, a figure emerged from the shadows, more grotesque and horrifying than before. "You can't escape us," it screeched, twisting in Madeira, manifestation of all I had feared, all I had unwittingly resurrected. The door slammed behind me, the light receding into a oppressing twilight. I was thrown into another realm, one of unending night, tethered to the darkness from which I had fled. The faces were gone, but their whispers remained, echoing in the dark recesses of my mind. And then I felt a cold hand brushing against my skin, and the quiet laughter of those who had reached their end resonated through me. I turned, heart sinking, recognizing the smell of decay mixed with sulfur. Behind me, the figure stood, tallies like smoldering embers, a smile too wide to belong to a living being. "Welcome back," it sneered. In an instant, the whispers grew overwhelming, merging with the haunting laughter of the souls I had tried to escape, and as the specter loomed closer, I realized the horrifying truth: whatever had sought to trap me was no longer a stranger. Somehow, it felt alarmingly familiar. The shadowy figure slid forward, intertwining with my deepest fears, and in that moment of recognition, I glimpsed a reflection in the darkness, my own face, too twisted in anguish. Then another voice chimed in, far too close, and in a tone drenched in malice said, "You are one of us now." Everything went black again, but this time, I understood that darkness was not just an abyss, it was home. The air crackled with malevolence, thickening as I breathed, suffocating and rancid. I staggered back, groping for some semblance of reality, but the specter loomed before might form, a nightmarish mirror of my own being, a dark caricature tracing the edges of my soul. I faltered, my heart racing in a cacophony of dread, and felt an unsettling sensation coursing through my veins. This entity wasn't merely summoning memories, it was entwining itself with the essence of who I was. I gasped as the realization hit. Memories were fading, and in their place, a new recollection emerged, gnawing at my sanity. I stood in the presence of my darkest self. As this monstrosity swayed and grinned, I could see fractals of my life reflected in its eyes, downcast glances from childhood, the disappointment of unmet dreams, and the haunting music of laughter that had long faded. It bared its teeth, a grotesque enjoyment tickling its lips, and I felt the cold grip of despair wrap tighter around my throat. Are you not pleased? It rasped, voice echoing like a dying whisper of winds lost in the void. Every decision led you here, every anguish forged our union. I am not merely a remnant of your fears, I am you, the true you, stripped of denial. Around me, shadows churned violently, drawing nearer, forming wisps of indistinct figures that danced in and out of focus, reaching for their revenge upon my surging guilt. I recoiled from their grasp, but every movement committed me further, merging my anguish with theirs. Suddenly, the weight of their collective sorrow pressed against me, squeezing the breath from my lungs and transporting me onto a path paved with sorrow-laden specters, each one aching for relief from eternal torment. Join us. They wailed, a symphony of suffering merging and mingling in a crescendo of despair that clawed at my sanity. Each lament was somehow familiar, as if echoing fragments of my past friends in sorrow, their faces contorted as they relived their tragedies unlived. I felt a perverse attraction to each entity, as if they were extensions of my soul, inviting me to embrace the fate they'd endured. No. I won't succumb. I cried, clenching my fists, my voice strangled with resolve. But as I turned to confront my dark twin, something shifted behind me. The shadows throbbed, pulsing like a heartbeat, swirling to life, and a sprawling chasm opened at my feet, revealing deep fissures that whispered terrors yet unimagined realities I had hoped were just dreams locked away. That I stumbled as the ground quaked, my foot caught at the precipice. The void beckoned, but as I teetered, a hand cold, skeletal, yet achingly familiar gripped my ankle, pulling me in. I looked down, shock flooding my veins. The face of my childhood friend, David, glimmered in the blackness, his features twisted in agony. "Help me!" he rasped, and in that moment, clarity pierced through my confusion. He had vanished years ago, lost to a darkness I thought I had escaped. The revelation rattled my core. Every lost soul I had mourned now stood wrapped in the tendrils of this cursed place, forever seeking solace they would never achieve. Remember them, the figure whispered, eyes ablaze with a cruel, mocking fire. They created you, just as you created them. Your connect runs deeper than blood, it's forged in the darkest recesses of despair. A cycle, endlessly repeating. As I twisted away, trying to break free from the shackles of my past, the shadows surged, coalescing into an amalgamation of their suffering insatiable and relentless. The memories blurred and morphed before my eyes, half-formed images appeared, shifting from Patrick, my high school bully, his smirk replaced by terror, to old flames extinguished by time and silenced at an O. I screamed, tearing through the darkness to escape their cries. Just as I dared lose myself in a desperate escape, I stumbled into a clearing bathed in a mere whisper of light. It illuminated the dust, revealing glimpses of shape and form, the remnants of those lost, now amalgamated, hovering between existence and oblivion. But before I could find respite, a guttural roar erupted behind me, and the figures I thought to escape morphed into a frenzied entity, a malignant mass tumbling forward, seeking my lost essence. I pivoted, tumbling into the shadows as it hurtled headlong into the light. They'd come for me, and there was no escaping this singular truth. Just as the darkness began to climax into a crescendo, spearing towards me with predatory hunger, the floor beneath cracked, revealing a chasm of howling souls. With one last terrified glance at the grisly reflection of my true self, I plummeted into the smoldering void. The stench of despair enveloped me, and as I fell, the cacophony of tortured screams ceased to break, replaced by an unnatural silence slicing in uneven whispers. We shall share our fates, forever merged. Then, out of the abyss, a hand clutched my throat, lifting me upward, tightening its grip, until I could no longer breathe. It lifted me to look into 1,000 faces staring back, each one familiar and each panting. "You've returned, this time, you'll never leave." Just as the darkness reclaimed everything, I fell into the depths, and with the echoes of laughter spiraling into a wretched symphony, the ground closed above me in a feral embrace. As my consciousness flickered in the abyss, I felt the weight of despair pin me against the cold, familiar stone. I was not alone. The oppressive presence of those I knew and those I had lost swirled around me, a tide of souls intermingling like whispering winds of dread. Each breath I struggled to take tasted like ash and memories. The faces mattered not, their eyes were empty vessels, reciting sins of a life I could not remember, that I was adrift in a murky sea, both a spectator to their suffering and a participant in their horror. I blinked, and the darkness shimmered, revealing the vivid contours of the memories I had long buried. The spirit of David loomed near, his lips curling into an agonizing grimace, as if reliving the moment he had slipped away from the world. "You left me," his voice resonated, deep and dissonant. "You chose to forget." Trapped within the miasma of remorse, I reached out, my fingers trembling as they encountered a spectral surface. It was cool beneath my touch, yet radiated a tangible ache. I hesitated, then pulled back, an instinctive fear warning me that to embrace this would be to invite the darkness that accompanied it. But their wails deepened, rising from the depths of my past, blending into a heartrending chorus that reverberated within my soul. Suddenly, the ground quivered beneath me, exhaling a frantic breath that echoed faintly like a dying heartbeat. The throne of wraiths appeared again, morphing into shapes less recognizable yet consumed by torment. These were strangers, their sorrow a toxic mirror reflecting my own dread. The reality of their anguished existence whispered truths I was unwilling to face. Each held memories of choices I had made and rejected, paths left untrodden, each a fork leading to a darker fate, infinite cycles, a voice intoned, smooth and penetrating, emerging from the shadows like a serpent from its hollow. My dark twin materialized, the mischievous grin widening, eyes glinting with malevolent delight. "You see, every face you've summoned a choice you never made. The ones who loved you have come home, to silence you. They seek their salvation through fear, a retribution they deserved." That I clutched my head, grappling with visions of lost moments, slaughter turning into screams, joy morphing into endless despondence. "No," I gasped, begging with the remnants of my sanity. Dismal fingers reached for my heart, pulling me into an endless whirlpool of despair, threatening to drown me beneath tales of havoc and grief. Yet, in the clutch of panic, something stirred within. A defiant ember ignited amid the shadows. "You cannot have me!" I roared, propelling myself backward, but the void around me laughed, a guttural taunt that mocked my resolve. My heart pounded like war drums, echoing with the fevered thoughts of flight. It became a mantra, spilling into the abyss. "I won't drown," the shadow figures shrieked in anguish, writhing in an unholy dance, and as I fought this accursed tide, the abyss quivered and split anew. Wisps of long-forgotten selves crawled out, their bodies mere outlines of my memories, contorted into grotesque replicas of who they were. They coalesced into a single form, my mother, her eyes sunken, pleading yet accusing. "You let me go," she whispered, strength drained from her tone, each word spinning tendrils deep within as hollow laughter erupted around us. "Mom, no." I cried out, spinning to face her, my heart fissured with regret. "I didn't mean to." But she merely floated closer, a puppet on strings of anguish. "You will forget again," she sighed, and with a quickened pulse, the room spiraled as my memories began to collapse upon themselves, shrinking tighter as if they were cradling me for a merciless end. In a ferocity of desperation, my instincts kicked in. I dug deep within the depths of my soul, the radiant warmth of my resolve igniting as I unearthed forgotten truths. "I will remember," I shouted, bracing against the smothering darkness. But as the virulent echoes of my abandonment filled the void, a piercing clarity ripped through what I did not know was a missing shadow. "Embrace your past." The darkness cawed, as a fervent light emerged, twisting the very fibers binding me to the lost souls. Suddenly, the specters erupted into an army of howling chaos, their cries colliding with my fear, merging into a singular beast of pure nether. In that final moment, just as I felt the violent encroaching shadows tighten around my throat, I turned to the light. A revelation flooding me, a reflection in the fleeting brightness offered not salvation, but the horrible truth of the choice I had made so long ago. My hand inched toward it, but just as it grazed the surface, the darkness unleashed a terrible roar, swallowing the last of my resolve. And then, there was nothing but the void, the hand slashing through the noise, bones snapping in a sickening crunch, and I was pulled under, a scream forever halted on the lips of a darkness that would not let go. Just before the darkness consumed me, a voice rasped in my ear, "The cycle is ours now." Welcome back. The weight of silence clung to the air, chill and heavy, as I felt the last tendrils of that darkness retract. I wasn't in the void anymore. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the bitter taste of iron bathing my senses. I opened my eyes to discover I was sprawled in an old, cracked hallway, the dim light flickering erratically like the last breaths of a dying lamp. Ghostly tendrils of fog danced in the corners, and shadows scuttled just beyond the flickering illumination, teasing my vision. Around me, the walls were marked with age and neglect, peeling paint revealing layers of torment etched deep into the stone. I struggled to rise, each movement a hard-fought battle against the lingering remnants of that suffocating void. The darkness still coiled within me, pulsating as if it sought to meld back into the shadows that had birthed it. A sense of wrongness surged through me. Where had it sent me? What was this place, and what awaited in its depths? With trembling limbs, I stumbled forward, guided by a primal thought: escape. The air was thick, laden with the muffled cries of despair that seemed to seep from the very walls. My heart raced as echoes of David and my mother's pained words reverberated, a chorus binding me to every intolerable choice I had made. With every cautious step, the whispered accusations grew louder, threatening to drown out any flicker of hope. I turned a corner and found myself in a narrow room, a wretched amalgamation of rusted furniture and mildew-coated shadows. In the center, an old mirror stood, its glass cracked yet shimmering with a strange allure. Drawn as if by invisible strings, I approached it, entranced by the faint whispers of distorted truths that beckoned from within. Reflections rippled in the surface, not of my own form, but those I had lost, each trapped within their own torment, forever haunting their own self-imposed prisons. Suddenly, the room darkened further, swallowing the light like a predator lying in wait, poised to strike at its prey. In frantic desperation, I reached for the mirror's edge, half expecting the jagged shards to cut my fingers. But instead of pain, a surge of energy rocketed through me, and in that instant, I was consumed by the glass. That I was hurled into a memoria night laced with regret. The air was colder, and the muffled sounds of arguments pierced through the haze. It was my home, but twisted beyond recognition, the jovial warmth replaced by shadows, the light slipping through the partitions like despair. I watched a scene unfold, an argument with my mother, her eyes alight with panic and frustration. "You don't understand," she shouted, collapsing in anguish. I stood there, distant and cold, rigid against her sorrow. In a heartbeat, the scene shifted, and the whispers of loss curled menacingly around me, but before I could process the horror embedded in that instant, a different memory ignited, a fleeting image of David's laughter, the warmth of friendship before it had crumbled into darkness. Yet that light was abruptly consumed as blood spilled across the floor, the image dissolving into an ocean of screams that merged violently with each other, drowning out reason. What had I chosen? What realities had I forsaken in pursuit of that impending doom? Just then, a chilling gale swept through the room, and the mirror began to ripple. Faces pressed against the surface twisted, contorted, mourning. Frantically, I turned to escape once again, only to encounter something unspeakably sinister lurking just beyond the threshold, a figure cloaked in shadow, its gaze burnished with malice. "Run," it whispered, each syllable gurgling through a throat lined with viscera. "You can never escape the choice you made." Fear turned to terror as I sprinted past it, the shadows clawing at my heels. They whispered of familiar fates, dragging me back to the depths of my making. The air vibrated with mockery, and with every breath, I felt their cold grip tightening. Shapes began to materialize, each an echo of every choice that had birthed that darkened realm. The faces pleading, accusing, twisting their mouths in agony as they lunged toward me. Just then, I reached the end of the hall, where a heavy door loomed, the only escape from this haunted place. I flung it open, and my heart plummeted. Beyond was a yawning abyss, a swirling vortex of light and shadow stirring in a chaotic dance. My mind screamed in rebellion as the somber tug-of-war raged within, but the insistent whispers urged me forward. "You will make your choice again." I hesitated, standing at the precipice, fear wrestling with an unexplainable call toward the terrible fusion of memories and choices arrayed within. As the echoes grew deafening, drowning out every rational thought, I finally stepped onto the ledge, drawn toward the swirling chaos. Just as I teetered on the edge, a voice pierced through the cacophony, sharp and clear, "Stop. If you leap, you will never return." That I froze as every ounce of dread crystallized around me. As my pulse raced, I turned slowly, faced with the shadowy figure from before, closer, its features now becoming grotesquely familiar, and that's when I recognized my own reflection etched in its eyes, me own self, twisted by the very choices I had made. I gasped, and just as the realization rooted in my core, the shadows surged around me, the portal behind me swirling with furious energy. I had seconds to choose, and a horrifying comprehension seized me, etching the weight of my fate with each heartbeat. "Choose wisely," it hissed, as the shadows beckoned me deeper into my darkest fears. And then it lunged for me, teeth glinting like knives, ready to drag me down into the bowels of what I had become. I wrenched my eyes away from the grotesque visage of my counterpart, my mind racing as terror clouded my reasoning. My heart thumped viciously against my ribs, a prisoner of fight or flight. The figure's mouth curled in a twisted parody of a smile, taunting me, reaching for my consciousness, ready to bind me to every choice I had ever made. The shadows swirled violently, wailing with a cacophony of lost voices. I instinctively stepped back from the abyss, the tempest of memories and decisions clawing away at the edges of my resolve. My pulse quickened in syncopation with their desperate crease, a chorus of the damned decrying my failure. They didn't want me to leave, they wanted to ensnare me within their eternal torment, but there was no time. I felt the breath of the dark figure behind me, a chilling caress vibrating against the nape of my neck, urging me promptly toward the precipice. "You cannot escape yourself," it rasped, the words melting into the very essence of the air, saturating my mind with dread. "Choose wisely," echoed hauntingly as I grasped my own trembling arms, each wave of despair intensifying the torment curling through my mind. What could I even choose? The certainty gnawed at my sanity. The path behind me was fraught with tormenting memories, each one racked with bitterness and grief. The abyss promised liberation but threatened to expose the worst of me. Just then, the whirlpool of light and shadow flickered violently, a blinding flash erupting from its depths. Forms began to coalesce within, drawing nearer, wraith-like figures entangled with fragility, writhing in anguish and desperation. I squinted, recognizing the familiar features of those I had lost, each one electrified with pain, their mouths opening in silent screams as they beckoned me into their nightmarish embrace. "Help us," they whispered in unison, the anguish palpable, reverberating against the corridors of my heart. I dared a step forward, their outstretched hands implored me, almost inviting me into their suffering. An aching familiarity wrapped around me, they wanted me to join their despair, trapped within their cyclic nightmare. "No!" I shouted, the sound stark against the howling wind that rose through the opening. The dark figure lurked behind me, a constant reminder of my own failures, its breath, hot and fetid, urging me to submit. Suddenly, without warning, the figures within the vortex began to distort, their flesh corroding under a cruel reality. It was as if the abyss was punishing them for their yearning, each scream becoming a soundless echo as they twisted and writhed, merging into one another, faces overlapping, despairing cries melding into an agonizing symphony. I fell to my knees, racked with the weight of their collective sorrow. Among the chaos, each face twisted into a gruesome mask, a reflection of my own doing, of every moment I had allowed negligence, fear, and regret to define my path. David's vacant stare burned into me, my mother's sobs clawed at my heart. Their pain was my creation, and here they were, ensnared by the very choices I had made. "Make your choice," the shadow figure bellowed, its voice a veritable storm cracking through my thoughts. "Do you wish to join them, to share in their fate? Or will you forsake them and plunge into the abyss of your own making?" I gripped the ground beneath me, fighting against the gravity of despair that pulled at my soul. The voices of the wraiths intertwined, forming a tapestry of my life's most haunting moments. In one breath, I could feel every regret clawing at my heart, every chance I had turned my back on. Each choice reverberated loudly, echoes from a past that had forged the very reality from which I now stood on the precipice. "Time is running out," the figure hissed, its patience evaporating in its malignant fervor. Shadows reached out, grasping at me, teasing my flesh with cold desperation. A choice, the weight of it pressed heavily against me. Taking a deep breath, I stood with resolve, eyes locked on the vortex, the light and dark merging, revealing visions of all I could become. But before I could make my decision, a chilling silence swept over the space. The screams stilled, the chaos quieted, the vortex flickered angrily, and the figures halted, their eyes boring through me, filled with a haunting clarity. And then, a voice, familiar yet alien, burgeoned from the depths of the shadows. "Why do you hesitate?" it asked, the resonance echoing with a familiarity that twisted my core. It was my own voice, tangling with the dark figures, weaving an indecipherable tapestry of fate. "You already know the answer," it whispered, a sinister promise hanging thick in the air. Desperation ignited in me, the shadows swirled more frantically, tugging at my garments, their cold fingers entwining around my ankles, ready to drag me into the dark abyss from whence I had come. And just as I inhaled to respond, the ground beneath me began to crack, splintering like glass beneath the weight of 1,000 regrets. "No!" I screamed, but the earth shattered, splitting apart like the memories that haunted me. I was falling, spiraling into the unknown, the echoes of my cries mingling with a chorus of otherworldly laughter. As I tumbled through the void, I realized all too late that the choice had already been made, and the shadows rejoiced, ready to claim another lost soul. As I plummeted through the ebon void, time lost all meaning. The air around me thickened, swirling with obsidian mist that caressed my skin like the cold hands of the damned. Each second stretched infinitely, and the laughter, a cacophony of terror, reverberated through the nothingness that enveloped me. I had no idea where I was going, only that the shadows below were eager to welcome me into their outreach. A sudden gust of freezing wind tore through me, raking over my back like sharpened claws. I gasped, the breath catching in my lungs as dread coiled tighter around my heart. My eyes squeezed shut against the oppressive darkness, but I could see beyond it. Visions burst forth, swirling and writhing like phantoms struggling to escape their own demi-sea nightmarish collage of faces, places, and decisions past. Before I could comprehend, I landed hard against gravel, its jagged surface biting into my flesh. I opened my eyes to a bleak landscape, barren and twisted, an impossible realm caught between worlds. The skies were bruised with angry hues, pregnant with storms that crackled with energy. The ground trembled beneath me, as if recognizing my presence, warning me. In the distance, the silhouette of a desolate city loomed, buildings spiraled into grotesque forms that seemed to ache and writhe like the figures in the vortex. Windows gaped like hollow eyes, dark and hungry, while shadows slithered through the narrow alleys like venomous snakes. I felt their gnawing presence, ready to engulf me should I make a single misstep. With trembling legs, I rose to my feet and ventured towards the city, each step echoing between the crumbling structures. Whispers floated through the air, a haunting melody echoing my torment, familiar yet chillingly foreign. They beckoned me closer, wrapping around my thoughts, igniting a familiar pain that clawed its way upward. "Help us, you abandoned us, you can still make it right if you choose." Their urgings twisted into a symphonic weave, casting a misty pallor over my thoughts. Images flickered in the corners of my mind, memories of those I had lost, glimmers of defeat drenched in sorrow. They were no longer wraiths, they were manifestations of my deepest fears, shaped by the empty spaces I had left behind. A sudden noise broke through my reverie, the sound of soft, pitiful weeping. My heart fluttered with recognition. Instinctively, I rushed toward the source, weaving through the rubble. The cries grew louder, morphing into hysterical sobs. I turned a corner and found her, Rachel's sister, a specter of sorrow, kneeling against a shattered wall, her hands clutching tufts of her matted hair. "Rachel." I called, but she didn't respond. She remained trapped in a fit of despair, whispering my name mechanically as if reciting a litany. "Why didn't you save us? Why did you leave us?" With trembling hands, I reached out to touch her shoulder, desperate to pull her from the quagmire of her grief. But as my fingers grazed her skin, she jerked away as if burned, her eyes tearing into mine with an ancient terror. "They are coming!" she shouted, her voice drowned in despair. "You must confront them. They know you're here, before I could question her, shadows began to seep from the cracks of the city, filtering into the air like thick smoke, congealing into anxious shapes that yawned and twisted toward us. A chorus of snarls and hisses rose as they approached, their features contorting into monstrous visages fueled by wrath. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Rachel's wrist, trying to pull her away, but my feet felt anchored to the ground, rooted by an invisible weight. Her terrified gaze flickered around us, as if she, too, could sense the encroaching doom. Just then, one of the shadows lunged, a clawed hand reaching for me, its fingers twisting and elongating like a grotesque worm. Something within me snapped. Fear ignited a new ferocity. Clutching Rachel tighter, I dashed through the city's serpentine alleys, the shadows shrieking in rage behind us. We stumbled into a vast open square, where the forgotten echoed eerily. A giant stone statue loomed at its center, a grotesque monster, pent up in eternal fury. Its eyes, two swirling voids of nothingness, seemed to bore into my very soul, tearing at the fragile seams of my sanity. The shadows spread like spilled ink, pooling around us. "They were once like you," Rachel whispered, her breath shaking. "You could have saved them. Now they hunger for your essence." As the shadows coalesced, they formed the anguished faces of those I had lost, each scream pulsing through me like heat against flesh, clawing at my heart. They lunged toward me, voices blending into a dreadful crescendo. In that moment, I felt the weight of their collective misery, a tidal wave threatening to sweep me into darkness. Then, with horror etched into every line of my face, I realized their intent. They sought not just my fear, but my very being, to drag me into their void, to make my pain eternal. "We have a choice," I screamed, my voice barely audible above the din. "We can choose to break this cycle." But as I spoke, I felt the shadows tighten their grip around me, a myriad of hands clawing at my flesh. I glanced at Rachel, and all at once, the whispers coalesced into a singular truth. The horrifying revelation ignited in the corners of my mind. Before I could comprehend the depth of my own discovery, a blinding light erupted from beneath the statue, illuminating the darkness around me in an eerie radiance. The shadows screamed, recoiling, but I felt an overwhelming pull toward it. All at once, the ground trembled violently, shards of stone bursting from the pavement as the statue convulsed. The shadows screeched in agony, their true forms being forced back into the chasms from which they emerged. But behind Rachel, I could see the darkness swell, a new horror emerging, a figure shrouded in malice, its eyes alight with hunger. "Your choice is futile," it hissed, its voice a symphony of the damned. "You cannot escape your own horrors." As the shadows lunged toward me, I grasped Rachel's hand, and in that fleeting moment, I understood the true nature of the choice I had to make, reverberated through my very being. And then, the ground beneath us shattered, giving way as I screamed. Darkness enveloped us once more, and the shadows rose, eager to reclaim their prey. I surrendered to the embrace of the darkness, but instead of the abyss pulling me into its depths, I found myself hurled into a different kind of nightmare. The shadows twirled around me, their chill twisting at my heart, and I collided hard against the damp earth, muffled cries echoing in my ears. I opened my eyes to a narrow forest, twisted trees gnarled like fingers clawing at a starless sky. A sickly miasma choked the air, and the ground pulsed with an unnatural heartbeat. There, scattered among the leaves, lay remnants of what had once thrive a child's broken toy, shards of glass glinting ominously in the half-light, a rusted locket that whispered a name I dread. Irene. My mother, Rachel? My voice trembled, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Fear slithered deep inside me, tightening its hold as my breath quickened. Where are you? Silence, except for the distant sound of cracking twigs and rustling leaves that hinted at unseen watchers. I staggered to my feet, the heavy scent of decay surrounding me. Each step felt like wading through thick fog. I was suffocating under invisible hands, the memories of my sister's anguished cries looped like a haunting melody in the back of my mind. As I navigated deeper into the forest, an unbearable weight settled over me. The shadows lingered at the edges of my vision, lurking, waiting, feeding off my despair. The ground beneath me seemed to squirm, as if alive, and with each pulse, I felt the memories claw back at meth choices I hadn't made, the lives I hadn't saved. A guttural whisper drifted through the air, its tones chilling and intimate. You left us, you can't return from this. I froze, the icy grip of despair constricting around my throat. Moments merged into nightmarish visions. In flashes, I saw their faces twisted with agony, lost warmth, lost laughter, all consumed by dark shadows, their cries rising in macabre symphony as they begged for acknowledgement. Resolved, I pushed on, refusing to succumb to my guilt. Resolutely, I separated the gloom from my thought, trying to remember Rachel's hint that I could confront the darkness. With newfound strength begrudgingly swelling within me, I began to chant names under my breath, a ritual of remembrance, a cathartic invocation bridging the void between us. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of rage and sorrow wrapping tight around my spirit. You dare summon us? A shudder cascaded through me as the shadows coalesced at the edge of the forest, forming silhouettes of the lost, wrenching figures twisted by wrath. Their features flickered into those of friends and family, eyes wide and hollow. They closed in, their mouths agape in cries that clawed at my sanity, words like knives tearing through the fragile veil between us. I could almost see past them, into deeper layers of darkness. Save us! They screeched, merging into a single, agonizing voice. Only your suffering can liberate us. Before I could scream, the trees groaned with lifelike agony, roots erupted from the soil like gnarled hands, snatching at my ankles, trying to drag me toward the unfathomable void beneath. I grasped at my own breath, desperate for clarity in this whirlwind of horror. I refuse. I bellowed at the strident shadows, fighting against the suffocating dread that claws at my heartbeat. The ground trembled beneath me, and for an agonizing moment, their anguished faces reflected back an unfamiliar, deep-seated truth that softened the hatred I had carried. Was this the price for turning my back? The pain weighed heavily on my conscience, threatening to topple me into their cursed embrace. I felt my tears ignite, spilling over as heartbreak and rage intermixed. I was the architect of my own suffering. Before me, the sorrowful visage of my mother appeared, reaching out, bloodied hands tainted by time. That I loved you, she rasped, her voice a fragile wisp carried by the wind. That I clenched my fists, an anger unfurled inside me, a burning torch against the encroaching night. I will not be your echo. I will not carry your burdens. The trees crackled as if the very forest screamed, the shadows recoiling, their faces swirling into rage. But from beyond their anguished faces, a flicker of light broke through, illuminating a path veiled in shadows. My heartbeat soared as clarity crashed into me. This was my choice, yet as I stepped forward, the ground beneath me erupted, fissures spiraling like wounds across the earth. My family's faces morphed, blurring into countless faces that whispered words of regret, sadness, and anger that attempted to bind my soul, and amid the cacophony, a tremor revealed itself, a shadowy figure emerging from the shifting darkness. Long limbs reached out like branches, its mouth twisted in a sinister grin, a maw of endless longing. You seek to wield choice, but you forgot that darkness is a hunger that never sates. As the light flickered, threatening to extinguish against the suffocating voids of shadows, I felt the pull deepening. I glanced back at the path I had carved, seeing my mother's anguished face twisting within the haze, desperately trying to pull me into the darkness. But to descend would mean relinquishing myself to eternity with them. I turned back to the flickering light, but it began to pulse. The shadows rallied behind the hideous figure, converging, filling the air with their desperate cries. The ground rumbled ominously, and the fresh terror gripped my heart. Your fate is sealed. Before I could flee, the figures lunged, walls of darkness crashing toward me like waves, overwhelming my senses. As I readied to scream, something flickered in the dim light of the clearing, a single glint of steel. A knife, crusted with time, lay in the pulse of light. I reached for it as the shadows dove for me, desperate cries echoing and swelling, my breath hitching. What choice would I make in this maelstrom of futility and torment? And in that moment of clashing reality, I felt the knife collide with my hand, the silence of the forest swallowed whole by a terrifying void. The brightness expanded, and my scream punctuated the darkness just before everything exploded into an abyss of screams and laughter. The chaos dissolved into silence, leaving only me and the echo of my own racing heartbeat. My fingers clenched the rusted knife, its weight both comforting and dreadfully ominous. The shadows receded, but the oppressive dread still lingered in the air, thick and unsettling, a fog creeping into my thoughts. I turned, only to be engulfed by the faint silhouettes of those I had known, their faces stretched in agony, eyes pleading, "You've returned, haven't you?" A voice whispered, dripping with malignant satisfaction. It was a voice I recognized all too well, the unmistakable timbre of my own dark twin, a version of myself I had tried to leave behind. In the murky darkness around us, it materialized, grinning maliciously, the very embodiment of guilt and despair. But I had made a choice, hadn't I? I had chosen this knife, this weapon, to confront the darkness, get away from me. I shouted, brandishing the knife, yet inside me was a wavering fear, each breath laced with uncertainty. I could feel the echo of every lost soul behind my chest, clamoring for release. "I will not become you." The darkness shuddered, the shadows twisting in response to my defiance, a tempest convulsing. With newfound determination, I held the knife before me, last line of defense. "I remember you," I shouted into the abyss, my voice breaking through their whispers of despair. "And I will not let you bind me any more." The laughter erupted, 1,000 voices melding into an insidious chorus, climbing over one another in a frenzy of cruelty. "You think you can sever the ties?" it jeered, the shadows swirling like a storm. "We are part of you. You can never escape what you have done." Yet deep inside, I felt a flicker, small but growing, an ember of courage igniting amidst the despair. I ran toward the darkness, shoving the knife forward, desperate to cut through the veil that surrounded me. The specter of my twin lunged at me, its features twisting and morphing, yet I pushed through the void, feeling the knife slice the air and collide with the darkness. I screamed, a sound resonating through the void, and something shattered, the weight bearing down on me cracked as the shadows howled in pain. I could feel tendrils of fear dissipate, the warmth of recognition sweeping through me, for each scream of agony unraveled like threads of a tapestry, revealing a visible path laced underfoot. But just then, I stumbled over a chilling realization. The faces I saw among the shadows were not just echoes of my past, they were decades of choices converging upon me, people I had trapped within my own guilt and their thirst for retribution. They dragged me deeper into their abyss, shadows clawing for my essence. "Help us, we need your pain," they cried, and my heart splintered as I fended off their grasp, slicing through shifting shadows, unaware of their true intent. As I fought against them to break free, the sorrow echoed louder, drowning me in a despair that whispered promises of suffering, bonding me to the consciousness of the lost. And with each confrontation, the question flickered in my mind like a distant star: could I bear the burden of knowing that I had let so many down? With every soul I recognized, every voice that merged into one cacophony begging me to join them, the air grew rancid, like oil and ash. The knife felt heavier in my grasp, a connection I could not bear but could not sever. Through the tumultuous storm, I noticed something, a flicker of light once again. Where the shadows receded there lay a path, illuminated and beckoning. But I couldn't turn away from the faces pushing toward me, souls twisted in despair. In a final moment of clarity, I understood I had to embrace my own darkness, transform it into light. I steeled myself. "I will not let you take me," I shouted, my voice raw, fracture lines rippling through my determination. As I held onto the knife, I felt it resonate with memories of my family, my friends, their laughter, their joy woven together with pain that I had danced around and denied. "Remember us," they pleaded, merging their sorrow into a wave crashing against my resolve. And with a heart full of anguish and resolve, I plunged the knife deep into the shadow, a release of all buried emotions gathering force. Their cries resonated with my own, a bond of lost memories shattering in waves of brightness, mingling and wrapping around me, sending out pulses of light that expanded outwards. The shadows howled, contorting in agony, as each wraith dissolved into a shimmering mist, slipping back into the ether from which they'd been conjured. The knife became a beacon, shattering the cycle of despair that had gripped me, illuminating the surroundings. With every whisper silenced, clarity loomed, palpable and real. But just as the last of the shadows finally dispersed, something deep within me twisted, a terrifying realization emerging through the fog. The specters dissolved, but their essence did not vanish. You might have freed them, an echo claimed, both tainting the air and scraping against my subconscious, but you cannot free yourself. The sickening chill returned as I spun in horror, panic bubbling up within me, grasping at my throat as I fell to my knees. The remnants of myself promised knowledge of my failure as the world around me warped anew, a dark reflection of what had just unraveled before me, and so, the tether snapped, plunging me deeper into a familiar void, darkness creeping back into the corners of my mind, wrapping around me like a second skin. I had learned the lesson but not escaped the torment of choice. The void loomed, with darkness ushering me toward it with a smirk. It would always have me, gnawing on the last remnants of my very being. You can't escape this, my dark reflection laughed, and even as I flailed against the looming darkness, the finality of it all began to set in. As the abyss closed in around me, swallowing the remnants of light, I could only whisper, "I will remember." And deep within the shadows, I could hear the echoes of laughter, not just the wraiths I had failed but the taut, strained breaths of my own looming darkness as it wrapped around me. The realization struck a heart-stopping chord that lingers even now. This was only the beginning, and the true horror lay in the choice yet to come.